While putting together an earlier video on the non-existent, or maybe real, lawsuit over the original home video releases of the first two Ghostbusters films, I spent a lot of time rewatching many of the scenes in excruciating detail. When you're spending your time focused on things other than what the filmmakers decided was important in a particular shot, background actions, character decisions, or whether or not an actor should have been included in a scene become easier to notice. In no particular order, here are some moments that may have slipped past those watching the original Ghostbusters movies. Please note, this is not meant to be a comprehensive list, and I do not claim to be the only one who ever brought these points up before. As shown by my earlier video, between the original theatrical release of Ghostbusters and widescreen television becoming the standard, Harold Ramis lost a lot of his screen time. This means many of Egon's actions went unnoticed for much of the time audiences spent watching the film over the years. When the Ghostbusters visit the firehouse for the first time with the real estate agent, Egon rattles off an expansive list of everything wrong with the building, only for the boyishly excited Ray to come down the fire pole and express his love for the place. Venkman turns to Egon for his opinion, and despite the latter's headshake that it's a firm no, Venkman says to the agent that they'll take it, presumably because the mortgages on Ray's childhood home is what's financing the purchase. That look of disgust on Egon's face is both priceless and often unnoticed. Similarly, right after the Ghostbusters catch Slimer at the Sedgwick Hotel, while Venkman is discussing their bill with the manager, Egon is subtly using his fingers to tell Venkman how much to charge for their services. This was another joke lost for years by being cut from the VHS copy and is still often missed by those watching the widescreen version. Speaking of the hotel billing scene, the outrage shown by the manager over being told the ghost trapping bill was $5,000.
$5,000? I have no idea to be so much I won't pay it.
May seem odd for modern audiences who may assume the snooty man was simply being cheap or trying to rip off the Ghostbusters by resisting such a meager amount, like a Karen angrily demanding a discount at the hair salon. However, when adjusted for inflation, that $5,000 becomes almost $14,000 in today's money. Even a high-class New York hotel might be expected to balk at being presented with such an exorbitant fee for what was, as far as they knew, the supernatural equivalent of catching a subway rat in a guest's bathroom. This is not to mention all the damage the boys did to Mrs. Van Hoffman's important dinner party as they discreetly trapped Slimer.
Yes, of course. Oh, they'll be totally discreet.
The first successful test of the proton packs came at the expense of an innocent maid pushing her supply cart. If you watch the background, she attempts to put out a fire with one of her cleaning bottles, even though the fire didn't appear to be there in the preceding shot. Something that's only noticeable by going through the scenes frame by frame is how in the first Ghostbusters, the stream of the proton pack always starts outside the tip of the barrel, like lighting a welding torch. This was different in Ghostbusters 2, where the streams always started at just the tip.
Just the tip.
After Vince Clorto takes over the body of Louis Tully, he always seems to be doing something in the background. These actions are easy to overlook, as the foreground characters are usually the focus of the scene as they provide important dialogue. Between the two original Ghostbusters films, there are several scenes in which Venkman physically assaults Ray. He pulls his ear at the beginning of the first movie and slaps his face toward the end. In the sequel, he again attacks Ray's ears by painfully twisting them to get Ray to divulge a secret. Perhaps this is a holdover from when Chevy Chase was being considered for a role in the film. Bill Murray once beat up Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live. The jail scene in Ghostbusters was an important exposition dump to bring Venkman, as well as the audience, up to speed on Gozer's plan. But where did they get the blueprints? Nobody gets incarcerated without being searched and having their personal effects confiscated. So how exactly were those blueprints smuggled into the holding cell? Exposition may not have been the only dump involved in that scene.
Pretend that I don't know anything about metallurgy, engineering, or physics, and just tell me what the hell is going on.
You never studied.
During the holding cell scene, Venkman does not understand what the other two are saying, and in exasperation demands they tell him what was going on in simple terms. While this is for the benefit of the audience, that dialogue, as well as Ray's response that Venkman never studied, raises an important in-universe point. Venkman is clearly unqualified. We knew this from the beginning, seeing him use electric shock against students and completely ignoring his research to pick up a girl. One of his students, which also raises some ethical points that I won't go into here. And the college dean tells him point blank he's a poor scientist, illustrated with many examples.
Your theories are the worst kind of popular tripe, your methods are sloppy, and your conclusions are highly questionable. You are a poor scientist, Dr. Venkman.
I see.
So why did two actual scientists, Ray and Egon, need Venkman around? It's tempting to assume he was included in their group merely as a source of labor, like how Egon had him gather a sample of the ectoplasm during the library ghost investigation, or Baby Oscar's poop. But throughout the series, Venkman shares an equal role in their activities, with Egon and Ray doing plenty of the grunt work themselves. Between him assaulting Ray like a brother picking on a younger sibling and happily shocking the innocent student during the psychic abilities test, Venkman is a bit of a bully, so perhaps Ray and Egon were merely too timid to kick him out of their group, but I think their relationship was more subtle than that.
Dr. Ray Stantz, would you please? The heart of the Ghostbusters. Thank you.
If Ray is the heart of the Ghostbusters and Egon is the brains, Venkman is the spine. Case in point, Venkman getting the hotel manager to agree to pay their bill. Ray is a wide-eyed man-child who views the supernatural with wonder.
A full torso apparition, and it's real.
Egon is a stolid intellectual who, even in a moment of sheer terror, can't help but answer a question with clinical precision.
What have you got left? Sorry, Venkman. I'm terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought.
Neither of those traits works well when dealing with the real world, where people are jerks and often take advantage of those like Ray and Egon. Okay, the other two may have needed Venkman for their eventual business, but why did they accept such an unqualified colleague at the university? Educational institutions do not give grants to just anyone, and even in the world of Ghostbusters, where there is actual physical evidence of the supernatural, most rational people still didn't believe in spirits. So if they were going to convince a stodgy board of regents to give workspace and funding to a couple of scientists investigating ectoplasm and symmetrical book stacking, they probably needed a smooth-talking con man.
You're more like a game show host.
Or game show host. How many noticed Dickless was there to watch Stay Puft stepping on the church? He was mostly cut out of that scene in the VHS version, and despite being there in the widescreen, he was easy to miss as the giant Marshmallow Man kaiju is more eye-catching. You have to wonder if at that moment Pecker had to be thinking about his own responsibility for the terror and damage being done to the city. But should he have been? It's been accepted by many Ghostbusters fans over the years that, while he may have been a schmuck, Walter Peck was actually right about the danger the Ghostbusters posed to the city. As an agent of the Environmental Protection Agency, he was simply doing his job investigating a new business that could have, and frankly did, pose a danger to the health and safety of New York citizens. The early 1980s was a weird time for the United States. During the 60s and 70s, more and more people started to recognize the damage being done to the environment by industrial pollution, car exhaust, and even day-to-day littering. This culminated in the establishment of a new federal agency tasked with enforcing laws to protect the country from these things. This department, the Environmental Protection Agency, was founded by Nixon of all people, and in the early days helped spearhead a lot of reform, including improving water supplies and lessening air pollution. But then during the early 1980s, the department was crippled after Reagan appointed a religious fanatic to lead it who was under the delusion that natural resources were meant to be plundered, not preserved. This attitude against governmental regulation trickled down, get it, to the rest of the country, so that officials who were once seen as the last line of defense against corporate greed and resource mismanagement were instead considered bureaucratic meddlers intent on hampering the entrepreneurial spirit of American industry with unnecessary or overreaching safety protocols. The character of Walter Peck was a sign of the times, an overbearing, snide desk jockey whose actions caused the great New York ghost apocalypse. But over the years, as we've seen the damage caused by climate change as the result of human activity, there's been a gradual shift toward the feelings of the hated EPA pencil neck and his concerns over the actions of the Ghostbusters. The thing is, even at the time it should have been apparent that the Ghostbusters were at fault. Similar to a later joke about how Ray still bought the Ecto-1 despite a laundry list of defects, during their first tour of the firehouse, Ray's childlike enthusiasm over a mere fire pole sealed the deal on their headquarters, despite all the things Egon said were wrong with it.
I think this building should be condemned. There's serious metal fatigue in all the load-bearing members. The wiring is substandard. It's completely inadequate for our power needs, and the neighborhood is like a demilitarized zone.
But if you actually stop to consider what Egon says, it's clear from the beginning that the boys did not take safety seriously. Egon says the building should be condemned due to structural fatigue, bad wiring, and not enough power for their needs, which presumably means their ghost containment unit was already going to be a problem, regardless of Walter Peck shutting down the grid. Egon even says during the Twinkie scene that the containment unit was already overstressed and that it was going to get worse in the near future, directly stating, not good, when asked point blank by Venkman how it was holding up.
Everything was fine with our system until the power grid was shut off by Dickless here.
No, it wasn't fine. Ray lied right to the mayor's face. As further proof of the Ghostbusters' disregard for public safety, when I went through radioactive iodine treatment, I had to follow a long list of safety precautions to avoid causing anyone else even brief exposure to the radiation that was coming off my body. Meanwhile, the Ghostbusters didn't seem to have any qualms over carrying untested and presumably radioactive equipment through populated areas.
Why worry? Each of us is wearing an unlicensed nuclear accelerator on his back.
The New York ghost apocalypse was going to happen regardless of whether or not that jerk from the EPA shut everything down. Egon described turning off the containment unit as being like dropping a bomb in the city, and after the engineers shut down the grid, they had to run out of the building to barely escape the explosion. This illustrates that for scientists, the Ghostbusters neglected one of the most important protocols for any hazardous material storage: backup or redundant safety systems. Even if the containment unit was reliable, it's not uncommon for New York or any city to experience blackouts. Hospitals have backup generators to keep essential life-saving equipment running in the event of a power loss, but the Ghostbusters couldn't be bothered to install a battery backup in case their grid was compromised? The proton packs were nuclear, so surely Egon could have rigged something to harness some of that energy to provide reliable power to the most important element of their ghost-catching business. It's even possible that if Peck hadn't shown up to prematurely shut things down, the unit could have failed at night while the Ghostbusters were asleep, catching them in the explosion and possibly killing them. It sucks, but in a way, Dickless was kind of the hero. Incidentally, the actor who played Walter Peck, William Atherton, had a higher screen credit than Winston's Ernie Hudson. Man, that guy just cannot catch a break. Dana Barrett was not only the love interest for Venkman in both films, but she was also one of the catalysts for both the overarching supernatural calamities facing New York. In the first Ghostbusters, despite being obviously put off by Venkman's smarmy personality and abrasive attempts to pick her up, she still shared an awkward kiss with him at the end. In Ghostbusters 2, it was established that they had a brief romance before she left him to marry Oscar's father. By the way, I'm with Sigourney Weaver and Ivan Reitman. This had to be Dana's ex-husband. Additionally, in the first film, she's the Ghostbusters' first paying client. However, in the second film, she went to Egon asking for help as a favor and not as a client, because by that time, the Ghostbusters were not only no longer in business, but also under a court order to not engage in ghost-chasing activities. The fact that she hugged both him and Ray established them as being friends and close enough to risk disobeying a court order that did eventually end up with them being put on trial. Winston was there in the courtroom and is sitting behind his former co-workers during the proceedings. At least some of the time. For some reason, he gets replaced occasionally by the Con Ed technician who took the stand for the prosecution. Winston also appears to be seen one last time during the initial attack of the Scoleri brothers, helpfully carrying a terrified woman out of the courtroom. But where was Dana Barrett during the trial? The only reason the boys were arrested in the first place was because they were trying to help their friend figure out what happened to her baby and if he was in any danger. Dana couldn't be bothered to show up to the courtroom and offer support like Winston? Also, later in the film, as she and Venkman are leaving on a date, the other three Ghostbusters arrive to get their colleague to help investigate the sewer and subway tunnels under the city. There's a cute moment when Venkman explains to Dana how they asked him to go with them, and her answer is just to smile and call for a taxi. But the entire reason Egon, Ray, and Winston were heading down there was to do an unpaid investigation regarding her slime problem, one that almost ate her baby just a few scenes earlier. People who aren't selfish are much more accommodating when someone else is doing them a favor. At the end of the trial in the second film, the judge ruled against Egon, Ray, and Venkman and sentenced them to fines and imprisonment. This was done in court, in front of witnesses, while he was at the bench, and presumably the court secretary was recording the judgment. This all happened before the Scoleri brothers made their appearance. It was only after the chaos began and the courtroom was emptied that the judge reversed himself and rescinded the restraining order to allow the boys to take up the proton packs. This second ruling was made under duress and with no witnesses other than the defendants and their lawyer. What would have prevented the judge, a hot-headed and biased individual, to later deny ever having dismissed the charges or the restraining order? In addition, the legal system has a very exact set of procedures that need to be followed when it comes to actions taken by a judge. I'm not a lawyer, but it seems that while the judge could honor his word to free the Ghostbusters, it would usually take filing for a court date for him to officially rescind the order, not to mention dismiss the charges in a case he already publicly ruled in favor of for the prosecution. That prosecutor certainly looked disgusted by the Ghostbusters and was at least sympathetic to the Weasley mayor's aide, if not following his instructions to imprison the boys. Isn't it at least possible she would have registered an official complaint after seeing them walk out of court in triumph when she literally just won her case against them? I may be overthinking this, as it's possible that until the judge's order is perfected, he can reverse himself without any issues, like what we saw in the film, but it still bugs me how easy the whole thing seemed. While making arrangements for a dinner date with Dana, Venkman mentions that he secured a babysitter for Oscar. But was that really necessary? Dana already had what appears to be a nanny helping her with her baby earlier in the film, although the woman is identified in the credits as Maria, Dana's maid. But is it common for maids to be taking care of a baby like what we see in the film? Further, when the boys knock, the maid looks up and Dana says, "I'll get it," implying that it would normally be the other woman's job. Maids aren't typically expected to greet guests, but a nanny could be expected to as another way to help out the mother. While we're on the subject of maids and nannies, could Dana afford one? She's established as a musician in the first Ghostbusters and successful enough to be able to afford a corner penthouse in a city known for ridiculously expensive real estate and apartment prices. In the second film, she's seen practicing her cello, so she's still a musician, yet she's also working for the museum restoring old paintings, which could imply that she's either not working enough as a musician that she needs a side gig, or she's working multiple jobs to afford childcare. It's also possible that she took a break from her music career to raise Oscar, and the museum job allowed her more flexibility. Apparently, in one of the earlier drafts of the script, Maria is identified as providing daycare for Oscar, although daycare is generally when you drop your child off somewhere, whereas a nanny is one who performs childcare duties at the home itself, like what we see in the film. In any event, Dana appeared to already have a regular person to take care of Oscar when she wasn't available, and it was presumptuous of Venkman to ask Janine to do so. And that was my look at some things I noticed while taking a microscope to the first two Ghostbusters films. Ooh. Now if you'll excuse me, I think I have to go take an exposition dump. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help this channel grow by clicking like and subscribe and checking out my other content. It's not all Scooby-Doo, but there's still a lot of Scooby-Doo.